tonight, let your day loosen its grip. You don't have to solve anything right now, and you don't have to fight your mind into silence. In this long, gentle journey, we'll follow a thread of ancient Zen wisdom that explains why certain emotions keep returning: anger, anxiety, heaviness, and why resisting them often makes them grow louder. A Vietnamese monk once discovered in the midst of war and exile that freedom isn't found by forcing yourself to be different. It's found by learning a softer skill to listen deeply to what hurts without adding more hurt. So get comfortable, slow your breathing, and let these stories guide you back to the one place you never truly lost your own quiet home within. Welcome to the long night. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is beginning their morning. Someone else is ending a long day. And someone is listening in the dark, hoping for rest. If it feels natural, you can share where you're listening from. Not as a requirement, only as a gentle reminder that you're not alone in wanting peace. For now, let your body settle. Let your jaw soften. Let your shoulders drop a little. Let the breath become easy, like it has nowhere to go, but here. There's a reason you keep falling into the same emotional traps, and it isn't because you're weak. It isn't because you lack discipline. Most people have tried the common strategies. They try to be positive. They try to push feelings away. They distract themselves at work. The discomfort scroll past it, drown it in noise. And sometimes that works for a moment. But the same patterns return. The same anger, the same restlessness, the same ache that shows up when the room gets quiet. If that's familiar, there's nothing wrong with you. You're simply meeting the mind's old habit, the habit of fighting what you feel. Zen offers a different understanding. It says that when you fight your emotions, you often give them more power. You feed them with resistance. You add a second layer of suffering on top of the first: anger at your anger, fear of your fear, shame about your sadness. And then the emotion is no longer just an emotion. It becomes a war. The monk who discovered this did not find it in a comfortable life. He found it during a war that split communities and families, when fear and ideology pushed people to see enemies everywhere. In that environment, he realized something painful and precise. The enemy is not only outside. The enemy is the habit of not listening, the habit of reacting from fear, the habit of turning pain into blame. And because he saw this clearly, he began to train in a different way, not to become numb and not to escape the world, but to keep the human heart awake. This is where the name Avalokiteshvara enters the story. Avalokiteshvara is often described as the bodhisattva of compassion, the one who listens to the cries of the world. But tonight, you don't need to hold it as a religious idea. Hold it as a human capacity, the capacity to listen so deeply that suffering begins to soften, the capacity to be present with pain without adding more pain, the capacity to offer attention that heals. Think of the last time someone truly listened to you. Not the kind of listening where they were waiting to speak. Not the kind of listening where they tried to fix you. Real listening where you felt heard. Often in that kind of presence, something in the body changes. The breath deepens. The chest loosens. The loneliness eases. The problem may still exist, but it feels less sharp because you are not carrying it alone. This is the medicine of listening, and Avalokiteshvara is a name for that medicine. The monk taught that this listening is not only for others, it is also for you. Because many people live their whole lives without ever being truly present with their own inner world. They either cling to pleasant feelings or they reject unpleasant ones. They praise themselves when they feel calm, and they punish themselves when they feel messy. But the heart does not heal under punishment. The heart heals under care. So tonight, we're not trying to get rid of emotions. We're learning how to meet them. Anger, anxiety, sadness, restlessness. These are not proof that you are broken. They are energies asking for attention. And when they are met with steady awareness, they change. Not because you forced them, but because you gave them the conditions they needed to transform. Zen psychology offers an image that makes this simple. It says your consciousness is like a garden. Many seeds are already there. Seeds of irritation, fear, jealousy, despair, but also seeds of patience, joy, courage, compassion. The question is not whether you have difficult seeds. Everyone does. The question is which seeds you water. Every day, your attention waters something. When you replay an old argument, you water anger. When you imagine rejection, you water fear. When you compare yourself, you water insecurity. And when these seeds are watered repeatedly, they become strong. They rise quickly. They feel automatic. This is what the tradition calls habit energy, deeply worn pathways in the mind that activate before you can think. But the garden can change. And it changes in a very gentle way. It changes when you begin to notice what you are feeding. It changes when you learn to pause. It changes when you bring the breath to the moment an emotion appears and you hold it like a mother holds a crying baby. Not to spoil it, not to silence it by force, simply to be there so it is no longer alone. This is how a difficult seed can lose its grip. This is how a wholesome seed can grow stronger. This is not only philosophy, it is something you can feel in real time. The moment you recognize anger is here a small space appears. The moment you breathe and stay present, the body begins to settle. The mind stops throwing fuel. And in that space, you begin to see what the emotion is made of. Under anger, there is often hurt. Under anxiety, there is often care. Under sadness, there is often love. When you see what is underneath, the emotion becomes less frightening. It becomes workable. It becomes a doorway rather than a trap. To make this teaching real, the monk often shared a simple story from a monastery where a child discovered in one shocking moment how inherited anger passes through generations and how it can be transformed. The story is gentle, but it is precise. It shows you the mechanism of habit energy in a way you will never forget. And it shows you that freedom is not a fantasy. It is a skill. It begins the moment you learn to listen. So let your breathing slow again. Let your attention rest on the simple rhythm of inhale and exhale. Nothing else is required. You are not trying to become perfect. You are learning to be present. And from that presence, a different kind of peace becomes possible, one that does not depend on your life being easy, only on your heart, learning how to hold what is real. Every summer, a young boy named Theo would come to this sanctuary with his little sister Maya. They arrived the way many people arrive, quietly hopeful, carrying questions they could not always name. Theo wanted to be calmer. He wanted to feel less tangled inside. He wanted to live without the sharp edges that sometimes appeared in him. But beneath that gentle hope, he carried a familiar hurt. His relationship with his father, Daniel, had been shaped by a pattern that repeated again and again. Whenever Theo fell down and hurt himself, instead of comfort, his father would shout. "How could you be so careless?" he would demand. "Why weren't you paying attention?" Theo would stand there, bleeding, cheeks burning. Not only from the pain in his skin, but from the deeper wound of being blamed at the very moment he needed tenderness. And each time it happened, Theo made a promise. When he grew up, when he had children of his own, he would never be like that. If his child fell and got hurt, he would not shout. He would not blame. He would kneel down, help them up, and hold them gently. He would make it better. This determination lived in him like a small flame, steady, sincere. Then one summer afternoon at the monastery, Theo was nearby, as Maya and another little girl, Clara, climbed onto a hammock together. They laughed as it swung. They pushed their feet against the ground. They disappeared into the simple happiness children can enter so easily. But in a single instant, something went wrong. Clara slipped and fell hard. Blood appeared immediately. Theo saw her on the ground, hurt, frightened, bleeding, and something rose in him so fast it startled him. Not tenderness, not care, anger. A hot surge in his chest, a sharpness in his mind, and words shockingly familiar pressed themselves against his lips. "Stupid," his mind whispered. "How could you do something like that?" In that moment, Theo felt his promise collapse like paper in rain. He saw it with painful clarity. The very pattern that had wounded him for years was now alive in him. It was ready to leap out and wound someone else. He was becoming his father. But this is where the story turns. Because Theo had been practicing mindfulness at Plum Village, he did not let those words fly out and land on Clara like stones. He caught himself. Not with force, not with shame, with awareness. He recognized what was happening inside him, and that recognition created a small space. He stayed silent. He stepped back as adults rushed in to help Clara. His heart was pounding, not with pride, but with the raw shock of seeing himself. Then he began to walk, slowly, mindfully. He breathed the way he had been taught. He let each step cool the heat in his body. He let movement settle the storm in his chest. And with each breath, a deeper understanding began to dawn. Theo realized he was not fundamentally different from his father. The same energy of impatience and blame had been transmitted to him quietly over time, until it lived in him too. And if he did not learn to transform it, he could pass it on to the next generation without ever intending to. In that moment, Theo saw his father in a new way, not as a monster, not as a villain, but as someone who had also been shaped by something deeper than personal choice. His father had inherited patterns too, from his own upbringing, from his own pain, from the way he had learned perhaps too young that fear and frustration can come out as harsh words. Theo understood that both he and his father were caught in what Buddhism calls habit energy, deep grooves in the mind, automatic reactions, patterns passed down from generation to generation until someone learns how to stop watering them and begins to heal. When Theo saw this, something softened. His anger toward his father began to dissolve, not because the hurt did not matter, not because the past became acceptable, but because blame no longer felt like the true answer. A different desire rose in him, quiet, steady, compassionate. He wanted to break the cycle, not by fighting his father, and not by hating himself, by practicing. He realized that if he did not learn to work with what lived in him, he might one day shout at his own child in the same way. And he saw something hopeful, almost mysterious. By transforming himself, he could heal not only his future, he could also touch the suffering of those who came before him. When that intention was born, Theo's resentment melted, and in its place came a wish to go home and tell his father honestly and gently, "I have the same kind of energy in me that you do, and I want us to practice together so we can both be free." This is what transformation looks like. Theo's breakthrough did not come from suppressing anger. It did not come from being stronger. It came from mindful awareness, the ability to see clearly what was arising within him without being completely swept away. This is the foundation of the path. To observe our emotions with the same compassionate attention that Avalokiteshvara offers to the cries of the world. But a natural question arises. How do we develop this capacity for clear seeing in our own lives? How do we learn to listen deeply, not only to others, but to the voices within ourselves? The worried thoughts, the old reflexes, the inherited reactions that rise automatically when we feel threatened or ashamed. The answer begins in the life of the Vietnamese Zen master and in what he discovered through suffering and exile. During the Vietnam War, when brothers were forced to kill brothers, he and his community began a movement with a simple message: "Don't shoot your brother." They tried to speak for ordinary people who did not want the war, people who could feel in their bones that the divisions were being fed by fear and power. But their calls for peace were silenced by both sides. Sometimes the only way to wake the world was through an act so shocking it could not be ignored. Monastics set their bodies on fire, not out of despair, but as acts of pure love. Desperate attempts to awaken compassion in a world that had fallen asleep to suffering. In 1966, Cornell University invited the Zen master to give lectures about what was truly happening in Vietnam. He intended to stay in America for only 3 months and then return home. But those 3 months stretched into 38 years of exile. The government of South Vietnam revoked his citizenship and banned him from returning. They saw his message of peace as a threat. For nearly 4 decades, he could not go home. And in the first years of exile, despite being a respected teacher, he struggled with a profound sense of homelessness. He traveled from city to city giving talks. He slept 1 or 2 nights in each place, and he would wake in the middle of the night disoriented, not knowing where he was. What city? What country? What continent? Night after night, he dreamed of his root temple in central Vietnam. In the dream, he climbed a familiar green hill lined with trees. He would make it halfway up and then wake, still in exile, still separated from everything that felt like home. The dream returned again and again. It broke his heart a little more each time, until something shifted through mindfulness and through deep listening to his own experience. He began to understand that home is not only a place you go to. Home is something you can cultivate, a way of being, a kind of presence that cannot be taken away. From that understanding, he developed a simple practice that became the foundation of his teaching. Breathing in, he would say, "I have arrived." Breathing out, "I am home." Mo, I have arrived. I am home. For the Vietnamese Zen master, these words were not a trick, and they were never a way to pretend that exile did not hurt. They were a recognition, a quiet seeing of something that had always been true. Beneath changing circumstances, beneath comfort and discomfort, success and loss, praise and blame, there is a place of peace that cannot be disturbed. A steady awareness that can hold everything without being destroyed by anything. This is what the Buddha called our true nature. And once the Zen master touched this true home within himself, something remarkable happened. The dreams of climbing the green hill in Vietnam began to fade. Not because he stopped loving his homeland, and not because the longing vanished overnight, but because the craving to be somewhere else loosened its grip. He could be present and at peace wherever life placed his feet. As his stability grew, his understanding of suffering also changed. He began to see that much of our pain does not come from circumstances alone. It comes from our relationship to circumstances. It comes from resisting what is and clinging to what we think should be. We suffer when we argue with reality. We suffer when we tell ourselves this shouldn't be happening, or I can't be okay until it changes. But when we learn to listen to our experience deeply, patiently, without rushing to fix it, another possibility appears. Even difficult emotions begin to reveal their message. Even challenging situations can become teachers. This is where compassionate listening comes alive. When the Zen master spoke of Avalokiteshvara, he was pointing to the same quality of presence that helped him find peace in exile. Avalokiteshvara is the one who listens to the cries of the world. But those cries are not only outside of you, they rise within you as anxiety in the chest, as anger in the throat, as sadness behind the eyes, as that quiet loneliness that can appear when the room is dark and the day is over. The practice is simple to describe, and it becomes easier only through repetition. It is the ability to be with whatever arises within yourself or within someone else without needing to fix it, change it, or escape from it. This does not mean becoming passive. It means developing enough stability, enough clarity to respond wisely instead of reacting from old conditioning. When someone shares their pain with you, deep listening is not about giving perfect advice. It is not about correcting their perspective. It is about offering presence. You breathe gently. You listen not only to the words, but to the human heart underneath the words. You create a safe space where their truth can be spoken and heard. And in that space, something softens. Healing begins not because you fix them, but because they are no longer alone with what they carry. The same practice applies inward. When anxiety appears, most of us try to think our way out of it, distract ourselves from it, or scold ourselves for not being calmer. But listening invites something different. You pause, you breathe, and you say, as if speaking to a frightened child, "Anxiety is here." Then with gentle curiosity, "What are you trying to tell me?" Often beneath worry, there is care. We are anxious because something matters. When you listen this way, emotions that once felt like enemies begin to change. They become messages. They become information. Sometimes they even become wisdom. To understand why this works so reliably, the teaching asks you to look a little deeper into the mind itself. It says, consciousness has layers like a vast lake. On the surface is mind consciousness, the stream of thoughts, quick reactions, planning, remembering, worrying. But beneath that surface layer lies a deeper realm where experiences are stored and patterns sleep until conditions wake them. When you begin to sense this deeper layer, you start to realize your emotions are not random storms. They arise from seeds, and seeds can be watered. And once you see your mind this way, the image of the inner garden begins to feel less like poetry and more like a map. The Zen master described consciousness as a garden because a garden helps you understand two truths at once. First, many seeds already exist in you. Some are pleasant, some are painful, but all of them are part of being human. There are seeds of joy and gratitude, patience and compassion, confidence and courage. And there are also seeds of fear, jealousy, irritation, despair. No one has only wholesome seeds, and no one is doomed by the presence of difficult seeds. The question is not what exists in your garden. The question is what you water every day through your thoughts, conversations, media memories, and even fantasies. You are watering certain seeds. When you replay an old argument, you water the seed of anger. When you imagine being rejected, you water the seed of fear. When you compare yourself and feel lesser, you water the seed of insecurity. Most of us do this without noticing. We believe emotions simply happen to us. But the teaching is clear. The mind grows what it repeatedly nourishes. This is why habit energy can feel so strong. It is not only that a pattern exists, but that it has been watered many times. It has roots. It has familiarity. And the mind seeking what is familiar returns to that pathway again and again, even when it creates suffering. This is not because you are weak. It is because conditioning is powerful. But conditioning is not destiny. Mindfulness changes the garden without violence. Not through self-hatred. Not through forcing yourself to be different. It changes the garden through awareness, because awareness changes what you feed. It gives you the ability to choose what you water. This is exactly what happened with Theo. When Clara fell and the surge of anger rose, he did not water it with harsh words. He did not water it with blame. He recognized it. He paused. He breathed. He walked. And by doing that, he watered a different seed: clarity, restraint, compassion. It may sound small, but in the inner garden, it was enormous. Each time you respond differently, you create a new path. And each new path is a quiet revolution. This is also why the Zen master's practice mattered so deeply in exile. If he continued watering the seeds of bitterness and injustice, he would be consumed. He had every reason to feed those energies. He had been cut off from his homeland, misunderstood, banned. But he saw that if he watered those seeds, his suffering would multiply without end. So he chose again and again to water the seed of presence, the seed of understanding, the seed of home. This does not mean you never feel anger or grief. The garden will always contain many seeds. The question is, what you do when a difficult seed rises into consciousness. Do you panic and try to destroy it? Do you indulge it and let it take over? Or do you practice the third way, the way of mindful care? When an emotion rises, you name it softly. Anger is here. Fear is here. Sadness is here. Not as judgment, and not as a command to go away, but as clear seeing. The moment you see clearly, you are no longer completely lost inside the emotion. You are holding it with awareness. Then you breathe, not to force it out, but to give yourself stable ground. Breathing is like returning to the earth. It reminds the body that it is safe enough to meet what is arising. And then you offer presence. You stay with the emotion, the way a caring mother stays with a crying baby. You do not scold the baby for crying. You do not demand silence before offering love. You hold. You recognize the emotion as energy, asking for care, for understanding. In time, what is held with tenderness begins to soften. This is Avalokiteshvara turned inward, the art of listening to your own pain without abandoning yourself. When you do this, the emotion stops being an enemy. It becomes an experience, an energy, something you can understand. Often, if you stay long enough, you begin to see what is underneath it. Under anger, there is often hurt. Under irritation, there is often fear. Under jealousy, there is often longing. Under anxiety, there is often care for something precious. When you can see what is underneath, the emotion begins to change shape. It becomes workable. This is why listening was never separate from peace. If people cannot listen to themselves and to one another, fear takes over. And when fear takes over, people create enemies, justify violence, and lose their humanity. To see how urgent this became in the Zen master's life, it helps to step back into the atmosphere of the war, where a simple human message, "Don't shoot your brother," was treated as a threat. The Vietnam War was not only a battle of weapons, it was a battle of fear, ideology, and misunderstanding. Neighbors became suspicious of neighbors. Families were split by loyalties they did not fully choose. Ordinary people wanted one simple thing: to stop the suffering, to live and work and raise children without terror in the air. But the loudest voices were not the voices of ordinary people. The loudest voices were the voices of division. In that climate, the Zen master and his community tried to speak from a different place. They refused to turn human beings into enemies. Their message was painfully simple. Don't shoot your brother. Do not let fear turn you into a machine. Do not let propaganda steal your ability to see the human face on the other side. Do not let the war enter your heart and make you forget what it means to be a person. But the world does not always welcome simplicity. When people are invested in a story of enemies, a voice that calls for understanding can feel threatening. It can be accused of weakness, even betrayal. And so their calls for peace were silenced, not only by one side, but by both. When you refuse to hate the other, you can become suspect to everyone. In this atmosphere, the community realized something painful. Sometimes words are not enough. Sometimes a world consumed by violence cannot hear gentle truth. Sometimes the only thing that breaks through numbness is an act so shocking that people are forced to stop and look. Monastics set their bodies on fire, not as despair, but as vows offered with compassion, extreme attempts to awaken the conscience of the world. It is difficult to hold this story. If your mind recoils, that recoil is the sign that your heart is still alive. The Zen master invited people to look deeper to see that these acts came from a love that refused to let the world sleep through the suffering of innocent people. In 1966, the Zen master was invited to speak in America about the reality of Vietnam. He intended to stay only 3 months, then return home. But the door closed behind him. The government of South Vietnam revoked his citizenship and banned him from returning, seeing his message of peace as a threat. And so, he became an exile. Exile is not only the loss of a place, it is the loss of belonging. It is the sense that the ground beneath your life has been removed. He traveled from city to city, giving talks often, sleeping only 1 or 2 nights in each place. He would wake in the middle of the night, disoriented, not knowing where he was. What city? What country? What continent? Even the air felt unfamiliar. Even the silence felt foreign. Night after night, the dream came. He dreamed of his root temple in central Vietnam. In the dream, he climbed a green hill lined with trees. Everything carried the feeling of home. He would climb and climb, heart full, and then he would wake still, in exile, still separated. The dream returned again and again, breaking his heart a little more each time, until through practice, he began to listen to that longing with tenderness. He did not scold himself for missing home. He did not demand the longing disappear. He listened. He breathed with it. And in that listening, something changed. He began to see that the longing for home was also the human habit of seeking salvation in somewhere else. We believe we will finally be okay when conditions improve, when the future is safe, when the past is healed. We keep climbing hills in the mind, and we keep waking into dissatisfaction. So he practiced returning. Breathing in, I have arrived. Breathing out, I am home. Not as poetry, but as training. Training the mind to stop running. Training the heart to stop begging the future to rescue it. And as that stability grew, the dreams began to fade. The pain of exile did not vanish, but it changed. It became held by a deeper peace. He could still love his homeland and work for peace without being destroyed by longing. This discovery was not meant only for war and exile. Every person knows a kind of exile, sometimes from a country, but more often from the present moment. We exile ourselves into regret and worry, into replaying and rehearsing, into living everywhere except where we are. The Zen master found that the way home is presence. And from that presence, a method was born, quiet, repeatable, strong enough to steady the mind even in a storm. It begins with something as ordinary as sound, carried by something as simple as a bell. In many Buddhist communities, the sound of a bell is not treated as a signal. It is treated as a friend, a voice of awakening that calls each person back to their true home. This is not about believing in anything special. It is about recognizing that within you lives a capacity for peace, for clarity, for coming fully alive right here. The bell becomes a reminder of what you already know, but often forget. The practice begins before the bell even rings. The person who rings the bell does not simply strike it and create noise. They prepare. They sit quietly and breathe, gathering scattered attention, softening the nervous system, returning fully to the body. They form an intention because the quality of their presence will travel into the sound. Body speech and mind in oneness. Heart traveling with sound. An aspiration that those who hear may awaken from forgetfulness, may transcend anxiety and sorrow. Then a half sound is offered, first a gentle warning so the mind has time to prepare. Conversations soften and stop. Hands pause, eyes lower, people turn inward. It is the difference between being jolted awake by a harsh alarm and being gently touched on the shoulder by someone who cares. When the full sound comes, people listen with the whole body. They breathe. They let the sound anchor their attention. They allow it to bring them back. Some traditions use a simple inner phrase, breathing in, listen, listen, breathing out. This wonderful sound brings me back to my true home. The home here is not a place on a map. It is the state of being present, alive and at peace with what is here. And the genius of this practice is that it trains your nervous system. Over time, you can use any sound as a bell, a clock, a distant chime, even a phone ringing. Instead of being pulled away by sound, you let sound return you to yourself. When your phone rings, you can let it ring once or twice while you take 3 conscious breaths. Then you answer from steadiness. Before you make a call, you can breathe and set an intention the way the bellmaster does. May my words bring understanding. May my words bring compassion. The practice also extends into transitions. Some communities ring a bell every 15 minutes. Each time, people pause and take 3 mindful breaths. You can create this support in modern life too. A gentle timer, a soft chime, a reminder that interrupts the trance of rushing. And each time you pause, you ask quietly, where is my attention right now? Often you find it was not here. It was in yesterday, in tomorrow, in worry, in planning. The bell invites you back. As the sound fades, something remains: a softer body, a clearer mind, a small but real sense that you are here and that here is enough. And from this arriving, another possibility opens. The present moment is no longer only a hallway you rush through. It becomes the most intimate place you can live. This is what the Zen master meant when he spoke of the most wonderful moment of your life. He said, the most wonderful moment of your life is not the moment you are waiting for. It is the moment you are living. Most of us move through the day as if the present is only a passage to something else. We believe we will be happy when the work is finished, when the problem is solved, when the body feels better, when conditions become easier. And while we wait, we miss the life that is already here. This is not because we are bad people. It is because the mind has been trained to chase. It has been trained to believe that peace is elsewhere, that home is in the future, that safety is in the next improvement. But when you practice stopping and returning, you begin to notice how costly that habit is. You begin to see how rarely you are truly present for your own life. The bell practice interrupts this trance. It gives you a clean moment to stop, and when you stop, you can arrive. You do not need to travel to arrive. You do not need to solve everything to arrive. You arrive by coming back to your breathing, your body, the sensations of being alive. And when you touch this, even briefly, you begin to understand why the present moment can be wonderful. Not because every moment is pleasant, but because life is here. Awareness is here. And with awareness, you can relate to whatever is happening in a new way. The Zen master would invite people to look at daily life with fresh eyes. A cup of tea is not only a drink, it is the clouds becoming rain, the rain becoming rivers, the rivers nourishing leaves, human hands picking and preparing fire, warming water, the whole cosmos gathered into a warm, simple moment. A piece of bread is not only flour and salt, it is sunshine and soil wheat fields, and wind farmers and bakers, the world arriving at your table. When you see like this, you are not half asleep. You are awake to connection, awake to interbeing, awake to quiet beauty that is usually overlooked. This is also how you stop shooting the second arrow. The first arrow is the difficulty that happens, loss, conflict, pain. The second arrow is what the mind adds. Stories of failure, stories of injustice, stories of fear. The belief that you should not feel what you feel. The belief that you must be different before you can be at peace. Mindfulness does not deny the first arrow. It prevents the second arrow from being fired again and again. And as this steadiness grows, a new image becomes possible inside you. Your awareness can become like a mountain. When the storm comes, the mountain does not panic. It does not chase the storm away. It remains grounded. The storm passes and the mountain is still there. This is not numbness. It is rootedness. Perhaps this is what you seek tonight, not a life without storms, but an inner mountain that can hold storms without collapsing. When you begin to live this way, you start to notice what conflict truly is. Not only disagreement of facts, but collisions of fears, wounds, and habit energy. This is why the Zen master trained people in one skill above all others, not to win arguments, but to listen until misunderstanding loosens its grip. Most conflict is not created by facts alone. It is created by how facts are held. Fear shapes perception. Stories attach to events. Conclusions harden into judgments. Two people can look at the same moment and feel completely different worlds inside them. One feels threatened. One feels abandoned. One feels disrespected. One feels unseen. And suddenly, the room becomes a battlefield. The Zen master taught deep listening as a discipline, not as casual politeness. Deep listening is the willingness to be present with another person's suffering without running away, without correcting, without defending, without trying to fix too soon. It is the willingness to hear what is underneath their words. Because most people do not begin at the deepest layer. They begin with the surface blame complaints, accusations. Their words may sting, but if you listen only to the sting, you respond to the sting and the battle intensifies. Deep listening asks you to hear the pain underneath the accusation, the fear underneath the anger, the longing underneath the complaint. This is difficult because your own pain rises too. Your own habit energy awakens. The body tightens. The mind prepares arguments. You want to protect yourself by attacking or by shutting down. Deep listening is the third way. It is protection through presence. It is strength that does not need to dominate. The Zen master taught people to prepare for deep listening the way a bell master prepares. Before a difficult conversation, you stop. You breathe. You gather yourself. You remember your intention not to win, not to prove, not to punish. The intention is understanding. And when the conversation begins, you listen with your whole body. Face relaxed, shoulders soft, breath steady. If the other person triggers you, you notice the trigger and return to the breath. You remind yourself that their words are often the outer clothing of a deeper suffering. He also taught that deep listening may require time, sometimes an hour, sometimes more. Not because the other person is always right, but because pain that has not been met comes out sideways. When pain is finally met, it begins to soften. Tone changes, body changes, story changes, and something real can finally be spoken. At the same time, deep listening is not martyrdom. If the other person's words are too violent and you are losing stability, you pause. You say gently, "I want to listen, but I am not calm enough right now. Please give me time." Then you return to breathing, return to your home inside, and return later when you can offer presence without collapsing. As you practice this, you begin to realize your reactions do not come from nowhere. They rise from a deeper place. They rise from what has been stored, repeated, inherited, and watered over time. To change the surface, you have to understand the depth. And that brings you back to the layers of consciousness, the surface mind, and the storehouse where seeds wait. The Zen master described consciousness as having layers like a lake. On the surface is the stream of thoughts and quick reactions. Beneath is the storehouse where seeds are kept, seeds of fear, anger, shame, tenderness, courage, peace. The storehouse is quiet, but it is full. It holds what you have lived. It holds what you have inherited. It holds patterns you did not choose, but still carry. And it holds possibilities you may not yet have touched, but are already inside you. When conditions are right, a seed rises from the storehouse into the surface mind. It becomes a thought, an emotion, a sensation, an urge. This is why certain feelings can appear suddenly as if from nowhere. They did not come from nowhere. They were awakened by a condition, a tone of voice, a familiar criticism, a moment of embarrassment, a certain silence. The mind recognizes something it has known before, and a seed rises. This is what happened to Theo. The moment he saw Clara bleeding, the old seed that had been watered in childhood rose quickly, the seed of blame, the seed of harshness, the seed of panic that turns into anger. Not because Theo wanted it, but because the conditions were there. Injury, shock, fear, and habit energy moved like a reflex. If you have ever snapped at someone you love and later wondered, where did that come from? This teaching is pointing to the same mechanism. A seed rose, awareness arrived late, and the pattern took the wheel. Habit energy often believes it is protecting you. It tries to control the situation, stop pain, create order. But because it is old and unexamined, it often creates the opposite of what you want. It spreads pain instead of ending it. The practice begins when you recognize what is rising. You do not analyze right away. You do not fix right away. You simply notice something is here. That recognition is already a turning point because it means awareness has arrived. And when awareness arrives, you are no longer identical to the emotion. You are the one who can hold it. Then you breathe, not to make the emotion vanish, but to give the body a steady rhythm. Breathing is like placing a gentle hand on your own nervous system. It says, I am here with you. It creates enough calm to keep the surface mind from throwing fuel onto the fire. This is where transformation begins. Because if you recognize and breathe, you are not watering the difficult seed in the old way. You are watering mindfulness, understanding compassionate presence. Once you understand an emotion as a seed rising from the storehouse, you stop treating it like an enemy. You begin to treat it like a visitor. And the question becomes simple. When it arrives, will you feed it with old stories? Or will you hold it with the kind of care that allows it to change? This is where the Zen master's image of a mother holding a crying baby becomes not only comforting, but precise. When a strong emotion rises, it can feel as if it fills the whole inner sky. Anger heats the chest. Fear tightens the throat. Sadness presses behind the eyes. In those moments, the mind believes an urgent lie that this feeling is all there is and that you must do something immediately to make it stop. That urgency is part of the emotion's power. It pulls you into reaction. It makes you speak too fast, decide too quickly, and plant words you will later wish you could pull back out of the ground. The Zen master offered a different way. An emotion is an energy. It is real, but not permanent. It is strong, but not your entire identity. And it can be held. Not held down, not suppressed, but held the way you would hold something precious and vulnerable. When a baby cries, The baby does not need a lecture. The baby needs arms, warmth, steadiness. A good mother does not fight the baby and does not run away. She holds first. And because the baby is no longer alone, the crying begins to soften. This is how you can relate to your own emotions. When anger arises, you do not need to become angry at your anger. When fear arises, you do not need to become afraid of your fear. You can say softly, "Hello, my anger. Hello, my fear," not as performance, but as recognition. Then you bring the breath. Not to push the emotion out, but to anchor yourself. Breathing in, you know you are breathing in. Breathing out, you know you are breathing out. The emotion is still there, but you are no longer drowning in it. You are holding it in awareness. If it helps you place a hand where you feel the emotion most strongly, chest, belly, throat. This is not superstition. It is a direct way to communicate safety to the body. It is like saying, without words, "I am here. I will not abandon you." Many people have never offered themselves this tenderness. They only offer it outward. But the practice invites compassion inward until you become your own safe place. Held with mindfulness, the emotion begins to reveal what it is made of. Anger is often made of hurt. Fear is often made of uncertainty. Jealousy is often made of longing. Sadness is often made of love. When you see what is underneath, the emotion softens. It becomes workable. And with practice, you recognize emotions earlier and earlier. At first, you see anger after you have spoken. Later, while the words are forming. Later, still at the first tightening in the body. And in that early moment, you can choose. You can breathe. You can step back. You can avoid planting a new wound. When you hold emotions this way, you begin to see how the inner world shapes the outer world. You begin to see how enemies are created not only on battlefields, but in living rooms, workplaces, and inside your own thoughts. From that, seeing a different kind of peace becomes possible, one that does not require hatred to be strong. When the Zen master spoke about peace, he did not speak as someone far from conflict. He spoke as someone who had watched fear turn ordinary people into instruments of violence. He had seen how easily the mind can be trained to divide the world into us and them, and how quickly that division becomes permission to harm. So he went to the root. He asked people to look closely at the idea of the enemy. Because the enemy is often not a person first. The enemy is a perception, an image in the mind, a story that reduces a living human being into a label. Once the label is in place, it becomes easier to stop listening, easier to justify cruelty, easier to believe your anger is righteous and your violence necessary. So he taught something that can sound impossible. At first, there are no true enemies, not meaning harm does not exist, and not meaning injustice should be ignored. He meant that when you look deeply, you see those who cause harm are also caught in fear, confusion conditioning, habit energy. They may be responsible for what they do, yes, but the roots often resemble roots in all of us. Fear of losing, fear of humiliation, fear of not surviving, fear of being powerless. This insight does not excuse harm. It changes the ground you stand on when you respond. If you respond from hatred, you add hatred to the world. If you respond from clarity, you can protect life without losing your humanity. Hatred is heavy. It burns the one who carries it. It tightens the chest, steals sleep, keeps you rehearsing arguments and sharpening an inner knife. And the tragedy is that hatred usually harms you far longer than it harms the person you hate. So the Zen master invited people to recognize the suffering inside hatred itself. To see hatred as pain, as protection, as a part of you trying crudely to ensure you are never hurt like that again. When you see it this way, you stop fighting hatred with more hatred. You begin to listen. You begin to hold. You begin to discover what it is made of. Often it is made of grief, often betrayal, often a longing to be respected, to be safe, to be understood. This understanding is not only for global conflict, it is for daily life. The mind wants an enemy when you feel ignored, when a parent cannot apologize, when a colleague's tone triggers you. But the practice invites you to pause and look deeper, to see your own wound being touched, to see the other person's wound expressing itself, to see two habit energies colliding. And from that seeing, you can stop adding fuel. You can refuse to pass pain forward. Compassion includes wisdom, and wisdom includes boundaries. You can say no. You can step away. You can protect yourself. But you can do it without hatred eating your heart. To stand on that ground, you need one more skill, deeply practical, sometimes life-saving. You need to know what to do when anger rises in your own body, not as an idea, but as real heat that wants to speak. Anger is one of the most misunderstood energies in human life. Some people fear it because they have seen what anger can do. Relationships shattered in a sentence, a moment of rage, becoming a lifetime of regret. So they try to get rid of anger quickly. They tell themselves they should not feel it. They push it down. They distract themselves. Or they smile while the body quietly burns from inside. Others do the opposite. They believe anger is strength. They let it speak through them. They let it harden their eyes and sharpen their voice without noticing what it costs. The Zen master offered a third way. Anger is an energy. The enemy is not anger. The enemy is unawareness. The habit of letting anger take the wheel. When anger takes the wheel, it drives straight into suffering. When mindfulness is present, anger becomes a signal, a messenger, a doorway. The first step is recognition. Anger is here. Small sentence, decisive act. Mindfulness has arrived. You are no longer completely lost inside the emotion. The second step is stopping. Anger pushes you toward immediate expression. But wisdom often means doing nothing for a moment. You do not send the message. You do not deliver the sentence that will land like a blade. You pause. You give yourself time. The third step is breathing. You return to the breath as an anchor. You breathe in and know you are breathing in. You breathe out and know you are breathing out. Not to push anger away, but to hold yourself steady while it moves. It helps to change posture, to feel your feet on the ground, to walk slowly if you can. Mindful walking gives the body a safe way to move energy without turning it into harm. And then comes the essential step, looking deeply. Anger is never only anger. It is often made of hurt fear, longing the need to be respected or protected. Anger can arise when boundaries have been crossed, when you feel unseen, when something precious feels threatened. When you look deeply, anger is often protecting a tender place, like a guard dog barking at the door. Under the barking is vulnerability asking for care. This is why the Zen master taught that when you are angry, you take care of your anger first. If you speak while the fire is strong, you will likely create more fire. you will water the seed of anger in yourself and the other person. But if you take care first, you can speak later from a place that is firm without being cruel. He offered a simple inner phrase: "My dear anger, I know you are there. I will take good care of you." This gentleness is not weakness, it is intelligence. Fighting anger gives it more energy. Caring for it allows it to calm. And once anger softens, you can communicate more truthfully. Instead of blaming you, reveal your experience. When that happened, I felt hurt. I felt afraid. I felt alone. These words invite connection. They make it more likely the other person can hear you. Over time, you recognize anger earlier and earlier, and the doorway to freedom appears sooner. This is why the Zen master compared anger to a crying baby, not to make the teaching sound sweet, but to make it usable. The image of the mother and the crying baby is a set of instructions disguised as tenderness. When a baby cries, the mother does not argue. She does not demand a reason before offering love. She understands the crying is a signal, an energy, a request for care. So she picks the baby up, holds it close, and becomes a steady presence the baby can borrow until it settles. In that embrace, the nervous system softens, breath becomes easier, the body begins to trust. The crying loses intensity, not because it was pushed away, but because it was held. This is how you meet your emotions. When anger cries, when fear cries, when sadness cries, you do not become a judge or a soldier. You become the one who can hold. Many of us were trained to meet emotion with indulgence or rejection. We either drown in it, believing it is the whole truth, or we shame it and push it away, believing we must not feel it. Both keep it stuck. The third way is to hold it in mindful awareness, with tenderness and stability, long enough for it to change. You begin with recognition. My anger is here. My fear is here. Then you bring attention into the body because emotions live in the body. Heat in the chest, tightness in the jaw, contraction in the belly, flutter in the heart. When you turn toward these sensations, you stop feeding the emotion with endless thinking and begin relating to it as energy that can be held. Then you offer the breath gentle and steady, not to force the emotion out, but to give yourself rhythm, like rocking. Breathing in, you know you are breathing in. Breathing out, you know you are breathing out. The present moment is always more spacious than the story in the mind. In that space, you can hold the emotion without drowning. A hand on the chest or belly can help. It communicates, I am here. I am not abandoning you. Many people carry pain with inner loneliness because they have never learned to be present for themselves. This small gesture rebuilds trust inside. The Zen master also offered a phrase not as hypnosis, but as direction. My dear anger, I know you are there. I am taking care of you. When said sincerely, something often softens. The emotion may still be present, but it no longer feels like a war. And as you hold the emotion, you begin to see what it is made of. This is where deep listening becomes insight. Anger often contains hurt. Fear contains uncertainty and old memories. Sadness contains love. When you see what an emotion is made of, you are no longer trapped by it. Understanding itself is freedom. The mother and baby image also contains a practical timing lesson. A mother does not try to solve everything while the baby is screaming. She holds first. She calms first. Only when the baby settles does she understand what it needs. In the same way, when anger is strong, it is not the time to debate or prove a point. It is time to hold the baby. Later, when you are calmer, you can speak in a way that reduces suffering instead of increasing it. Over time, this practice becomes a new habit energy. The mind learns it does not need to explode to survive. The body learns intense feelings can be held and survived. And each time you respond with mindfulness, you water stability and compassion. As this steadiness becomes real, you begin to notice emotions earlier, and you begin to meet them with skill. The Zen master called this training because it is built through repetition and through learning which mental states to feed and which ones to stop reinforcing. The Zen master taught that this way of holding emotions is a capacity you cultivate like strengthening a muscle. The more you practice mindful breathing and mindful walking, the steadier your attention becomes, and the easier it is to stay present when difficult feelings arise. Over time, you notice emotions earlier before they turn into speech or action. You recognize the first signs: tightness in the jaw, heat in the chest, harsh thoughts forming, and in that early moment, your freedom is greatest. Buddhist psychology describes many mental formations, different states that arise in consciousness. Some are wholesome, such as compassion, gratitude, equanimity. Others are unwholesome, such as anger, jealousy, discrimination. But the practice is not an inner war where you try to eliminate everything unpleasant and keep only what feels good. That kind of struggle rarely works. The practice is learning to work skillfully with every mental formation, strengthening wholesome states so they become more available, and transforming difficult states by meeting them with mindfulness and understanding. When you understand anger as energy, you stop being terrified of it and stop being controlled by it. You can meet it, hold it, listen to it. This is what Theo began to discover. The anger he carried toward his father was not just hatred. It was love distorted by hurt and misunderstanding. When he could see his father not as an enemy who chose to harm him, but as someone carrying inherited patterns he never learned to transform, the anger began to change. It softened. It moved toward compassion, not through willpower, but through clear seeing the natural result of mindfulness. This is one of the most liberating aspects of the teaching. When you look deeply into the causes and conditions of a difficult emotion, it begins to lose its grip. You stop taking it so personally. You stop believing it defines you. You begin to see it as a pattern arising and passing according to conditions. And this perspective creates space for a wise response instead of an unconscious reaction. You also begin to see how healing can move through generations. There is a moment in many lives when a person looks honestly into themselves and recognizes not only their own reactions, but the long line of patterns passed down through families. That moment can feel devastating if met with judgment, but it can be liberating if met with compassion. Theo reached that moment during walking meditation. As he walked, breathing settling, allowing the mind to clear, a profound understanding began to emerge. A pattern can be inherited, yes, but a pattern can also be transformed. And transformation is built not by waiting for perfect conditions, but by training in ordinary moments. That is why the Zen master emphasized turning daily life into practice, because daily life provides the repetitions that shape the mind. And once you see this, you start to notice something quietly empowering you are practicing all the time anyway. The question is, Whether you are practicing rushing and reacting, or practicing stopping and returning, this is where the simplest tools become the most powerful, because they give you a way to choose again, even in the middle of your day. At the monastery, the Zen master taught that we do not transform our lives by waiting for ideal circumstances. We transform our lives by training in ordinary moments. This is why the bell was so important. Not because a bell is sacred by itself, but because it creates a clean interruption. It gives you a way to stop the mind's momentum and return to your true home. And the most practical part was this: you do not need a monastery bell. You can turn daily life into bells. You can turn transitions into practice. You can turn the very moments that normally steal your peace into moments that restore it. When the phone rings, let it ring once or twice while you breathe. When you hear a notification, pause for 3 breaths before touching the screen. When you open a door, feel your hand on the handle and take 1 conscious breath. When you wash your hands, feel the water and return to the body. When you sit down, arrive fully in the sitting. When you stand up, arrive fully in the standing. These are small moments, but small moments are how habit energy is rewired. The mind learns through repetition. The body learns through repetition. The storehouse learns through repetition. This is how you create a new pathway. Instead of the phone training you to rush, it trains you to return. Instead of messages training you to tense, they train you to breathe. Instead of triggers training you to react, they train you to recognize. And each time you do this, you water steadiness, patience, the part of you that can listen. For Theo, this was not abstract. He could already sense how easily the old pattern would rise again with his father. A tone, a criticism, a sharp word. And suddenly, the same reflex would appear. So he began to imagine a different possibility. If he could build a habit of stopping and breathing in small moments, perhaps he could bring that habit into the difficult moments. If he could practice arriving when a bell rang, perhaps he could also arrive when his father spoke harshly. If he could practice listening to a bell, perhaps he could practice listening to the pain underneath his father's harshness. This is why mindfulness is not only comfort, it is protection. It protects you from saying the sentence you will regret. It protects you from passing pain forward. It protects you from watering seeds that keep suffering alive. And it does this quietly through small choices repeated until they become a new habit energy. Stop, breathe, recognize, return. When practice becomes this natural, it begins to show its deepest purpose. Not only to calm you down, but to change the emotional climate between people. Because the most challenging moments are rarely the ones you face alone. They are the moments inside relationship, the moment someone you love speaks harshly, the moment an old wound is touched, the moment you could repeat the past or pause, breathe, and choose a new path through understanding. The Zen master often said that love without understanding is not yet true love. It may contain good intentions, loyalty, the wish to help, but if understanding is missing, love can still create suffering. People hurt each other not always because they want to harm, but because they do not know how to listen. They speak from pain, interpret through fear, and a small misunderstanding becomes a story. The story becomes a judgment. The judgment becomes a wall. Soon, 2 people who care about each other feel like strangers in the same room. This is why deep listening is not a luxury. It is a bridge. It is the practice that allows love to become real. To restore connection, the Zen master taught one vow to listen with compassion, not to judge, not to correct, not to defend, to listen so the other person can finally feel heard. And when someone feels heard, something in them relaxes. They may still be upset, but they are no longer alone. That experience of not being alone is often the first medicine. But listening like this requires preparation. If you enter a conversation while your own anger is burning, you will not hear. If you carry your arguments like weapons, you will not receive the other person's words. So you stop first. You breathe. You gather yourself. You remember what you truly want, not victory, not control, not punishment. You want understanding. You want truth. You want peace. Then you listen with the whole body. Face soft, shoulders relaxed, breath steady. You listen not only to words, but to suffering beneath words. Often, the sharp sentence is the outer shell of fear. Often, complaint is the outer shell of longing. If you can hear the longing, the conversation changes. And the Zen master taught patience here. Sometimes you refrain from interrupting for a long time, not because you agree, but because you are allowing the other person to empty their heart. When pain has been carried for years, it does not come out neatly, but when it is finally met, tone changes. The person begins to speak from deeper truth, fear, grief, loneliness, the wish to be loved. At the same time, deep listening is not self-destruction. If the other person's words are too violent and you are losing stability, you pause. You say gently, "I want to listen, but right now, I am not calm enough. Please give me time." Then you return to breathing, return to your inner home, and return later when you can listen without collapsing. This is compassion with boundaries. And after listening, you speak from a calmer place. You do not speak to accuse. You speak to reveal. You describe your experience rather than labeling the other person. When that happened, I felt hurt. I felt afraid. I felt alone. These are not weak words. They are honest words. And honesty spoken gently invites listening in return. For Theo, this was no longer theory. He could feel what would happen when he returned home. The old buttons would be pushed. The old wounds would be touched. His father might speak sharply, and the seed of anger would rise. But now Theo had something he did not have before recognition breath, the ability to stop and return, and a new understanding of his father, not as an enemy, but as someone caught in habit energy. When you see someone as an enemy, you want to punish. When you see someone as caught, you want to help them wake up. That shift changes the future. And as understanding becomes the ground, peace is no longer a fragile mood. It becomes a way of meeting life. It becomes possible to carry truth without cruelty and strength without hatred. From here, the story naturally widens beyond one household and one monastery into the places where a single voice of compassion can touch the world. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage do not happen on battlefields with weapons. They happen in quiet moments when a human being chooses love over hatred, understanding over revenge, compassion over the burning desire to be right. What follows are true stories from one of the most brutal conflicts of the 20th century, stories that reveal how ordinary people can become extraordinary warriors. Not warriors who destroy, but warriors who heal. Warriors who build bridges where others see only division. These are not tales of military strategy or political maneuvering. They are stories about what happens when the human heart refuses to be hardened even in the presence of extreme suffering. They are also stories that ask you to look closely at a difficult truth. Sometimes the person you call your enemy is simply the person most in need of compassion. And sometimes the path to peace demands sacrifices the world struggles to understand. In the 1960s, a beautiful country in Southeast Asia was being torn apart by forces its people had never chosen. Foreign powers had drawn lines on maps, imported weapons, and carried competing ideologies into villages that only wanted to plant rice, raise children, and live. Neighbors became enemies overnight. Brothers were forced to kill brothers using guns and bombs that came from distant lands, fighting for causes imposed by people who would never face the consequences of the violence. On one side, there were Soviet-made AK-47s. On the other side, there were American M16s. Superpowers treated an ancient land like a chess piece in a global game. The tragedy was not only physical destruction, though, that was overwhelming. Villages, burned families, separated temples, destroyed children growing up, knowing only war. There was also a spiritual destruction quieter, but just as devastating, the way the conflict pressured people to abandon their deepest values of compassion and harmony, replacing them with hatred and suspicion. In the midst of this madness, a group of monks, nuns, and lay people began a movement with a message so simple that a child could understand it, and so radical that it threatened everyone in power. They called it, "Don't shoot your brother." It was not a political slogan. It was not a call to support one side over the other. It was a reminder of something the war had made people forget. The person wearing the enemy uniform was someone's son, someone's father, someone born with the same capacity for love and suffering as you. The movement represented the voice of ordinary people who could see through the artificial divisions being forced upon them. Rice farmers who had no interest in communist or capitalist ideology and only wanted to tend their fields in peace. Mothers who did not care about geopolitical strategies and only wanted their children to grow up without fear. Elders who remembered a time when neighbors helped one another during harvest season. Regardless of political belief, students who dreamed of building a more beautiful society rather than destroying the one they had inherited. But this voice of sanity was dangerous to those who needed the war to continue. Military contractors profited from endless demand for weapons. Politicians built careers on fear. Foreign powers used the conflict to advance strategic interests. And so, the peace activists found themselves silenced by both sides of the war, treated as traitors by people who claimed to be fighting for their freedom. Their books and articles were banned by both the communists and the anti-communists. Their calls for reconciliation were labeled threats to the war effort. They discovered a painful truth in a world gone mad with violence. One of the most dangerous things you can be is a person who refuses to choose between artificial sides. A person who insists on seeing the humanity in all people, even those designated as enemies. The leader of this peace movement was a young monk who had founded a university and a school for social service. He had trained in traditional Buddhism, but believed ancient wisdom must be applied to contemporary suffering. He called this approach engaged Buddhism, a spirituality that does not retreat from the world's pain, but meets it directly, offering compassionate responses to war, injustice, poverty, and oppression. Yet there came a point when ordinary methods of communication failed, when their voices were drowned out by propaganda on every side. And in that silence, some of these peaceful warriors made a choice that shook the world. If words could not be heard, they would speak through the ultimate sacrifice. This decision was not made in anger or despair. It was made through deep meditation and careful preparation, with the understanding that a life offered in this way would carry a message no censorship could fully erase. There are moments in history when a human being's love becomes so focused, so unwavering, that it takes a form most of us cannot imagine. In the middle of that war, when words were censored, when peaceful voices were drowned out by ideology, and fear, an elder monk made a decision that would mark the conscience of the world. He chose to offer his body as a final message, not to destroy, but to awaken. Not to condemn, but to call people back to their humanity. To understand this, you have to understand the spirit behind the act. In the mind of the Zen master and his community, this was never about death for the sake of death. It was about compassion that refused to be ignored. It was about a vow that said, if the suffering of my people cannot be seen, then I will become impossible to overlook. It was also rooted in a deep spiritual discipline. A mind trained in meditation can hold pain in a way that an untrained mind cannot. This does not make the act less intense. It simply shows that the act did not arise from panic. It arose from concentration, from clarity, from love. The elder monk prepared carefully. He did not rush. He practiced in silence. He prayed not for fame and not for political victory, but for awakening. He wished that those who witnessed the act would not respond with more hatred, but with insight. He wished that soldiers would lay down weapons. He wished that leaders would listen. He wished that ordinary people would remember the value of human life again. And he wished perhaps most of all that the act would not be misused as a symbol for violence, but held as a symbol for compassion. When the day arrived, people gathered in a public place. There was no shouting. There was no chaos at first. There was a heavy stillness, like the air before a storm. The elder monk sat down in meditation. He sat with dignity, with the steadiness of a mountain. Those who were there later described the atmosphere as unreal, as if time slowed. The elder monk did not look like someone trying to escape life. He looked like someone offering life. He looked like someone making a prayer with his whole being. Then the flames came. It is difficult to place words around this without turning it into spectacle. The Zen master always warned against that. He asked people not to be fascinated by the fire, but to listen to the message behind it. Because the act was never meant to entertain the mind. It was meant to pierce the numbness of the heart. It was meant to interrupt the trance that allows violence to become normal. Witnesses reported that the elder monk remained still. He did not run. He did not scream. He did not move, even as the fire consumed his body. His stillness was the message. It said, "Look closely. There is something here worth waking up for." It said, "Human life is sacred." It said, "Do not let hatred turn you into a machine." The image traveled across the world. People who knew almost nothing about Vietnam were suddenly forced to see. The war was no longer only a headline. It became a human reality written in flame. Some people reacted with outrage. Some reacted with horror. Some reacted with confusion. But the world could not pretend. It did not know. The veil of distance was torn. The Zen master later spoke about this act with great care. He said that if you look only with ordinary eyes, you will see only tragedy. But if you look with the eyes of compassion, you may also see something else. You may see a bodhisattva act an act of great love, carried out not to harm others, but to awaken them. He was clear that it was not something to imitate. It was not a method to glorify. It was a rare expression of compassion in a context where ordinary communication had been suffocated. And this is where the teaching becomes intimate again. You and I may never face circumstances like that, but we face the same mechanism in smaller forms. We know what it means to feel unheard. We know what it means to watch suffering continue while people look away. We know what it means to want to shake someone and say, "Please see what is happening." And we also know how easy it is in those moments to turn that urgency into anger, to turn that anger into hatred, to turn hatred into speech that burns. The elder monk's act, held in the Zen master's understanding, points to another possibility. It points to a compassion so deep that it does not need hatred to be fierce. It shows a courage that does not need an enemy to fight. It shows that love can be powerful enough to stand in the middle of violence and still refuse to become violence. After the elder monk's sacrifice, the movement for peace faced even more pressure. The world's attention flickered, then moved on, as attention often does. But the suffering continued. And within the community, another story unfolded, one that reveals a different face of the same courage. Not an elder monk, but a young nun. Not someone near the end of life, but someone with a whole future still possible. And the message she carried was quieter in its language, but just as piercing in its devotion. Not long after the elder monk's sacrifice, the war continued to grind forward and the suffering did not pause. Villages still burned. Families were still divided. Young men were still pushed into uniforms, told to kill people who spoke the same language and prayed to the same ancestors. And in the middle of this ongoing sorrow, a young nun made a decision that startled even those who had already witnessed extraordinary courage. She was not old. She was not tired of life. She was not seeking escape. Those who knew her spoke of her gentleness, her clarity, her quiet discipline. She practiced meditation. She served others. She carried the kind of calm that comes from sincere training. And yet she could not bear the way the world had become numb. She could not bear the way human beings were being treated like pieces on a board. So she chose to offer her body as a message, not to accuse, but to awaken. The Zen master later explained that to understand acts like this, you must look at the intention. Intention is everything. Without intention, an act can become self-destruction. With intention rooted in compassion, an act can become a form of prayer. In this young nun's mind, the sacrifice was a bell loud enough to wake a sleeping world. She wanted leaders to listen. She wanted people to stop pretending. She wanted the suffering of ordinary villagers to become impossible to ignore. Before the day came, she wrote letters. She prepared not with drama, but with stillness. She practiced breathing. She practiced letting go. She practiced directing her mind toward love instead of fear. She made it clear that she did not act out of hatred for anyone. She did not act out of a desire to punish. She acted out of love for her people and love for peace. She wanted her death if it came to be like incense offered on an altar, rising as a reminder that life is precious, that violence is madness, that compassion is the only path that does not create more suffering. When the moment arrived, those nearby felt the same heavy stillness. The young nun sat down and entered meditation. And again, fire appeared. Again, the human mind struggled to hold what it was seeing. Again, people were forced to stop, to look, to feel, to remember. It was not a spectacle meant for the eyes. It was a cry meant for the heart. In the aftermath, some people responded with rage, some with political interpretation. Some tried to use the act to fuel further division, but the Zen master kept guiding people back to the essential point. If you allow these sacrifices to become weapons in your mind, you betray their intention. If you allow them to deepen hatred, you turn compassion into fuel for war. The only way to honor such acts is to let them awaken understanding, to let them soften hearts, to let them inspire non-violence, not more violence. And here the teaching becomes even more subtle. The Zen master said that suffering often makes people want something dramatic, something that will solve the pain quickly. But real transformation rarely happens through drama. It happens through practice. It happens through the patient work of changing habit energy. It happens through learning to listen to calm, to speak, to understand. Acts like the elder monks and the young nuns were rare bells ringing through history. But the daily bell, the one that can truly change the world, rings in ordinary moments when you choose not to add more suffering. Still, these sacrifices did change something. They reached across oceans. They moved the conscience of people who had never heard Vietnamese spoken. They caused journalists and diplomats to pay attention. They gave the Zen master a painful kind of credibility. The world could see that the call for peace was not a convenient slogan. It was a vow people were willing to die for. And so invitations came. The Zen master traveled speaking in halls and universities, meeting religious leaders and activists. He carried the stories of his people and the message of engaged Buddhism. He asked the world to see that the war was not a heroic crusade. It was a tragedy made of misunderstanding. He asked the world to listen to the ordinary villagers who had no interest in ideology, only in survival. He asked the world to look at the human cost and to stop feeding the flames. In time, his voice reached someone whose own life had been shaped by the struggle for justice, someone who understood the power of non-violence and who would recognize in the Zen master's message a kindred spirit. Their meeting would become a turning point, not only for the Zen master, but for the global understanding of peace. It would also show that deep listening is not a private spiritual comfort. It can influence leaders. It can alter movements. It can shift history. The story widens again, and with it, the question returns to something intimate. What happens when a voice of compassion meets a world of power? What happens when someone asks again and again for people to stop shooting their brothers? And what happens when a single meeting can carry the weight of an entire nation's suffering into the heart of another human being? The Zen master carried the suffering of his country the way some people carry a bowl filled to the brim. He could not move carelessly. If he rushed, if he spoke with hatred, if he allowed despair to take over, the bowl would spill and drown everything around him. So he learned to move with mindfulness, to speak with steadiness, to listen, even when the world did not want to listen. His calm was not an aesthetic. It was survival. It was also service. Because if he could stay clear, he could become a voice for those whose voices had been silenced. As he traveled and spoke, he did not present the war as a contest of good and evil. He presented it as a tragedy made of misunderstanding. He described villages caught between forces they did not choose. He described young men forced into violence by fear and propaganda. He described how the conflict was being fueled by foreign powers, treating a living country as a strategic piece on a board. And he continued to repeat the simplest message he knew: don't shoot your brother. Not because it was poetic, but because it was true. The one you are asked to kill is often not your enemy. He is another victim of the same machine. At first, many people in the West could not hear this clearly. Their minds were trained to see the world in opposing camps. They wanted a simple story: one side, right, one side, wrong. They wanted heroes and villains. But the Zen master kept returning to the same practice he taught in meditation. He invited people to stop, to breathe, to listen, to feel the suffering underneath the slogans. And slowly, his words began to reach hearts. Around this time, he wrote a letter to a man whose name had become synonymous with non-violent courage. Martin Luther King Jr. was leading a movement for civil rights, facing hatred and threats, and yet insisting on love and understanding. The Zen master recognized something in him, a willingness to stand against injustice without becoming injustice, a willingness to resist without hatred, a willingness to listen deeply to the suffering of both the oppressed and the oppressor. So he wrote, and he spoke not only as a monk, but as a human being asking another human being to see. He told him about Vietnam, not as a distant political argument, but as a living wound. He described the suffering of children, the burning of villages, the way ordinary people were crushed between forces beyond their control. He asked King to speak out against the war, to use his moral voice to awaken the conscience of America. And he did so with the same spirit he taught in mindfulness, not accusing, but inviting, not condemning, but revealing. The letter carried both pain and respect. It carried the hope that compassion could cross oceans. Eventually, they met. When the Zen master arrived in the United States, he spoke at universities and churches, and he met many activists. But the meeting with King was different. King was not only a political leader, he was a spiritual leader, someone who understood that non-violence is not passive. It is disciplined. It is courageous. It demands that you hold your own anger, so it does not become hatred. It demands that you see the humanity of those who oppose you without surrendering to injustice. In that meeting, the Zen master and King recognized each other as allies in the same deeper struggle, the struggle to keep the human heart awake. The Zen master later said that in that moment, he felt seen. Not only his words, but the suffering behind his words. And that is what deep listening does. It allows one human being to carry another human being's pain without turning away. It allows truth to land. It allows compassion to become real. Soon after King spoke out more openly against the war, he called it a moral disaster. He named the suffering it created. He challenged his own country to look at what it was doing. This was not an easy choice. It brought criticism and risk. But the Zen master believed that when a person of conscience truly listens, they cannot remain silent. Listening becomes action. The Zen master also nominated King for the Nobel Peace Prize, not as a political gesture, but as a recognition of spirit. He saw in King a bodhisattva-like presence, someone whose life was devoted to reducing suffering through love. And he wanted the world to recognize that this kind of courage, non-violent, compassionate, steady, was the kind of courage humanity needed most. Then, not long after King was assassinated, the Zen master felt the shock deeply. He had not only lost an ally, he had lost a brother of the same vow. He understood that violence often tries to silence voices of compassion, but he also understood something else, that a compassionate life does not end when the body ends. Its influence continues. Its seeds remain, and those seeds can be watered by others. In the midst of grief, the Zen master returned to practice. He returned to breathing. He returned to walking. He returned to the vow not to create enemies, because grief, if not held, can become bitterness, and bitterness becomes another war. So he held the grief like a crying baby. He listened to it. He allowed it to be present without letting it harden into hatred. And as he continued his path, another meeting awaited him in another city, in another context, one that would bring both recognition and another kind of sorrow. It would show again that the path of peace is not a straight line. It is a series of losses and openings. It is a practice of remaining present through both. After the assassination, the world felt colder for a while, as if a lamp had been extinguished in a dark room. Many people who believed in peace and justice wondered what hope remained. The Zen master felt that sorrow too. But he also knew that when a lamp goes out, the darkness does not win forever. If the lamp has lit other lamps, the light continues. This is how he held his grief. Not by denying it, and not by turning it into bitterness, but by treating it as an energy that needed care, an energy that could be held without becoming poison. In the years that followed, he continued to travel and speak. He was still in exile. He was still separated from his homeland. But he had learned how to carry that separation without being destroyed. He carried it as a vow. He carried it as a purpose. And as his teaching spread, he met people who would become part of his community, people who would help turn his vision into living practice. One morning in Geneva, he sat down for breakfast with a group of friends and supporters. It was a simple scene, plates, cups, ordinary conversation. Yet the atmosphere carried a quiet weight. They were speaking about peace work, about the suffering in Vietnam, about what could be done. Someone at the table looked at him with a kind of reverence and said something that was meant as praise. They called him a bodhisattva. The word bodhisattva can sound distant, like something from ancient scripture, but the Zen master understood it in a practical way. A bodhisattva is simply a person who has committed their life to reducing suffering, a person who cultivates understanding and compassion, not for their own comfort alone, but to help others awaken. When someone called him this, he felt uneasy. Not because he rejected the ideal, but because he did not want to be turned into a symbol. He did not want praise to become a distance. He wanted people to understand that the work of compassion is not reserved for special beings. It is the work of ordinary human hearts trained through practice. He responded in his gentle way making it clear that the true Bodhisattva is not one person. The true Bodhisattva is the collective energy of mindfulness and compassion, the community that practices together the people who keep listening instead of hating. In other words, the Bodhisattva is not a pedestal, it is a path, and anyone can walk it. But that breakfast in Geneva would also become associated with another kind of sorrow. In those years, the peace movement was under constant strain. People were threatened, communities were watched, letters were intercepted. In the midst of this, the Zen master received news that shook him. Someone he loved, someone he trusted, someone who had been part of the work had been lost, whether through violent disappearance or the slow crushing of circumstance loss kept arriving like waves. Sometimes the waves were public, sometimes they were private. Either way, they tested the heart. This is one of the hardest truths on the path. When you commit yourself to compassion, you do not escape suffering. In some ways, you become more sensitive to it. You feel more. You cannot hide behind numbness. You cannot pretend. And yet the practice gives you something that makes this sensitivity bearable. It gives you the ability to hold sorrow without being swallowed. It gives you the ability to stay open without breaking. The Zen master returned again to the same core method: recognition, breathing, holding, looking deeply. When grief arose, he did not label it as failure. He did not tell himself he should be above it. He recognized it. Grief is here. He breathed with it. He held it like a mother holds a crying baby, and when the grief softened, he looked deeply into what it was made of. He saw love. He saw connection. He saw the wish that human beings would not have to suffer this way. In that seeing, grief became not a weight that crushed him, but a fuel that clarified his vow. And still the world did not make it easy. The Zen master was watched by governments. His books were banned. His entry was denied in certain places. He was treated as a threat, not because he carried weapons, but because he carried clarity. He carried a refusal to hate. And for systems built on division, that refusal is dangerous. In time, the pressure became concrete in a particular way. Travel permissions were denied. Visas were revoked. Invitations were blocked. The Zen master's capacity to move freely was restricted again and again. He had become a person without a homeland, a teacher without a country, a voice of peace that could not return to the people who needed him most. And in this tightening, another layer of the teaching became even clearer. When the outer world becomes constricted, the inner world must become vast. If you cannot control political conditions, you can still cultivate inner freedom. If you cannot go home in the ordinary sense, you can still arrive home in the breath. This is where the practice of not creating enemies becomes essential. Because when a person is blocked, misunderstood, and punished, hatred can feel natural. Hatred can feel justified. But hatred would only create another prison. So the Zen master continued to practice seeing with the eyes of compassion. He continued to remember that those who opposed him were also caught in fear, caught in ideology, caught in their own habit energy. And that insight leads to one of the most challenging questions in the whole teaching. How do you respond to those who harm you without becoming like them? How do you protect what is right without letting hatred enter your heart? How do you see oppressors as victims of their own confusion without excusing injustice? This is where the Zen master's teaching on no enemies becomes not an abstract philosophy, but a practical necessity. When you hear the phrase no enemies, the mind may resist immediately. It may feel unrealistic. It may feel like a spiritual idea that sounds beautiful in a quiet room, but collapses in the face of real harm. If someone has hurt you, if you have been treated unfairly, if you have watched people suffer under cruelty, the word enemy can feel like a reasonable description. It can feel like clarity. It can feel like protection. The Zen master understood this resistance. He did not ask people to pretend that harm is harmless. He did not ask them to confuse compassion with weakness. What he offered was a deeper kind of clarity. He said that when you call someone an enemy, you close the door of your own heart. You stop listening. You stop seeing. And in that closed state, you become capable of actions that create more suffering. The label enemy becomes a permission slip for violence, sometimes physical violence, sometimes emotional violence, sometimes the slow violence of contempt. So no enemies was not a denial of reality. It was a refusal to let your mind become a battlefield. It was the decision to keep your humanity intact, even while facing injustice. It was the recognition that if you allow hatred to enter, you have already been defeated inwardly, even if you win outwardly. The Zen master invited people to look deeply into the roots of harm. He said that when you look closely, you will often find fear at the base. Fear of losing power, fear of humiliation, fear of being attacked, fear of not surviving. People who are caught in fear can become cruel. They can become rigid. They can become willing to destroy others to protect their own sense of safety. In this way, those who oppress are also victims. Not victims in a way that erases responsibility, but victims of their own confusion. Victims of the seeds that were watered in them, often long before they had the freedom to choose differently. This way of seeing changes your response. If you respond to an oppressor with hatred, you add hatred to the world. You may feel strong in the moment, but you are planting the same seeds that created the oppression. You are continuing the cycle. If you respond with clarity and compassion, you can act firmly without poisoning your own heart. You can protect life without losing your humanity. You can resist injustice without becoming injustice. This is not easy. It requires training. It requires the ability to hold your own anger, your own fear, your own desire for revenge. It requires the ability to listen deeply, even when part of you wants to close. And it requires boundaries. The Zen master never taught compassion as passive acceptance of harm. Compassion includes wisdom, and wisdom includes the ability to say no. It includes the ability to step away. It includes the ability to protect yourself and others. But it does so without feeding hatred. To make this practical, he offered a simple question. When you feel hatred towards someone, ask, "What am I trying to protect?" Often hatred is a crude form of protection. It says, "Never again." It says, "I will not be vulnerable." It says, "I will not be humiliated." If you listen to hatred this way, you begin to hear the vulnerable part underneath it. You begin to hear fear. You begin to hear hurt. And when you can hear that vulnerability, hatred begins to loosen because it is no longer your only shield. He also taught that the image of the enemy is rarely complete. The mind takes a few actions or a few words and turns them into a total identity. He is cruel. She is evil. They are monsters. This simplification is how hatred survives. But if you look deeply, you begin to see causes and conditions. You begin to see a person shaped by trauma, ideology, culture, fear. Again, this does not excuse harm. It simply prevents your mind from becoming rigid and blind. The Zen master would sometimes say that the most dangerous thing in the world is not a weapon. It is misunderstanding. Because misunderstanding creates enemies. Misunderstanding justifies violence. Misunderstanding makes people believe their hatred is righteousness. And that is why deep listening is not only personal therapy, it is peace work. It is the foundation of a world where people do not have to keep harming each other. When the Zen master was banned from returning home, when he was misrepresented, when his work was obstructed, he had every reason to hate. But he practiced something else. He practiced seeing those who opposed him as human beings caught in fear. He practiced remembering that their actions were also driven by suffering. And this remembering kept his heart open. It kept his mind clear. It allowed him to continue working for peace without becoming bitter. If you bring this down into your own life, you can see how the enemy-making habit appears in small ways. A colleague becomes the problem. A family member becomes toxic. A stranger becomes idiot. And in that labeling, you stop listening. You stop seeing. Your body tightens. Your mind becomes sharp. You begin to rehearse contempt. This is how war begins on a small scale inside a single mind. The practice is to notice the moment the label forms, to pause, to breathe, to remember that the person in front of you is also carrying a story, also carrying fear, also carrying pain. Again, this does not mean you tolerate harm. It means you refuse to add contempt. It means you keep the door of understanding open, even while you set boundaries. From this ground, the Zen master's teaching on anger becomes even more important. Because anger is often the first energy that pushes you toward enemy making. Anger says, attack. Anger says, punish. Anger says, make them pay. If you can learn to work with anger skillfully, you protect your heart from becoming a battlefield. You protect your relationships. You protect your sleep. And you protect the world, because a world is made of minds, and every mind that refuses hatred is one less place where war can grow. And so the teaching returns again, not as repetition, but as a spiral. It returns to the breath. It returns to recognition. It returns to the art of holding emotion, like a mother holds a crying baby. Because only when you can take care of your own anger can you respond to injustice with clarity instead of revenge. When the Zen master spoke about oppressors as victims of their own suffering, he was not trying to soften reality into something comfortable. He was trying to protect something precious inside the listener. He was trying to protect the human heart from becoming the next instrument of violence. Because once hatred settles in the heart, it does not stay politely in one corner. It spreads. It touches your speech, your sleep, your body, your perception. It makes the world feel narrower. It makes the mind sharp and tired. And slowly, without noticing, you begin to resemble the very force you oppose. So he invited people to look deeply, not to excuse harm, but to understand its roots. He said that if you only look at the surface, you will see an oppressor and a victim. You will see cruelty and pain. And that is true. But if you look deeper, you will also see fear. you will see ignorance. You will see a person whose inner life has been trained by certain seeds. Seeds of suspicion, seeds of superiority, seeds of numbness. You will see the ways power can intoxicate the mind and make it forget that other people are real. And you will see how a heart that has never learned to listen becomes capable of shutting out suffering, the way a person shuts the door to avoid hearing a cry. This is why the Zen master said, the real enemy is not a person. The real enemy is ignorance. The real enemy is the absence of understanding. The real enemy is the habit energy that turns fear into aggression and confusion into cruelty. If you fight only the person, you may win a battle and lose the war. Because the seeds that created the person's actions can remain alive in the collective mind, and they will simply rise again in another form. But if you learn to recognize and transform the seeds, fear, hatred, dehumanization, then you are working at the root. He often used the language of causes and conditions. A human being is not made from one moment. A human being is made from countless moments. Family history, childhood wounds, cultural conditioning, the stories they were fed, the fears they never learned to hold, the ways they learned to survive. When you look at someone only as evil, you stop seeing causes and conditions. You stop seeing complexity. You stop seeing reality. And the mind becomes rigid. It becomes blind. In that blindness, you can become capable of your own violence even if you believe it is justified. To see oppressors as victims does not mean you remove accountability. It means you refuse to dehumanize. Accountability belongs to action. Dehumanization belongs to hatred. You can hold someone responsible while still seeing them as human. You can resist injustice while refusing to become hatred. This is the razor edge the Zen master walked, and he taught that this edge is where real peace work happens. He also knew that some wounds are too raw to look at this way at first. If you have been harmed, the nervous system wants protection. It wants a clear boundary. It wants to say, never again. And the teaching respects that. You do not force understanding like a command. You begin by taking care of your own pain. You begin by making sure you are safe. You begin by holding the trembling part of you that still flinches. Only then does the possibility of looking deeper become available. And even then it comes slowly, like dawn, not like a switch. So the Zen master offered a very gentle sequence. First, acknowledge the suffering. Do not pretend. Do not spiritualize your way around it. Name what happened as harm. Name the pain as pain. Let your heart tell the truth. Second, protect what needs protection. Set boundaries. Step away if you must. Say no when no is needed. This is not hatred. This is wisdom. Third, return to your own inner world and begin the work that prevents the harm from living on inside you as poison. This is where mindfulness becomes liberation. Because even when you have stepped away from the person who harmed you, the image of them can continue living inside your mind, taking your attention, stealing your sleep, occupying your inner space. The teaching is not saying go back and accept. It is saying, do not let them live inside you as a fire that keeps burning. And this is where deep listening returns. But now the listening is directed at your own hatred, your own anger, your own fear. Not to judge it, but to understand it. If hatred arises in you, you can treat it like an emotion crying for care. You can say softly, hatred is here. You can breathe. You can place a hand on the chest. You can ask, What are you protecting? Often the answer is simple. You are protecting your dignity, your safety, your sense of being valued. Under hatred, there is usually a wound. Under hatred, there is a frightened part of you that does not want to be hurt again. When you meet that frightened part with tenderness, hatred begins to loosen because it is no longer your only shield. The Zen master also taught that the mind often creates enemies because it cannot tolerate uncertainty. It wants a clear story. It wants a target. It wants a reason for suffering that feels contained. If I can blame you, then my pain has a name. This is understandable. But blame is a poor medicine. It can feel like strength, but it rarely heals. It usually keeps the nervous system activated, keeps the story alive, keeps the body tense. Understanding, on the other hand, can be a true medicine. Understanding does not mean agreement. It means seeing clearly. It means recognizing what is true, including what is painful, without adding poison. He would sometimes say that compassion is not a feeling you force. It is a fruit that grows from understanding. You cannot command your heart to be compassionate towards someone who has harmed you, but you can water understanding of your own suffering, understanding of the other person's causes and conditions, understanding of how fear creates cruelty. And when understanding grows, compassion may appear naturally not as approval, but as a softening, as a release from hatred's grip. This is also why he emphasized community practice. When you try to do this alone, it can feel overwhelming. But when you are supported by others who practice mindfulness, you can borrow their stability. You can borrow their calm. You can borrow their way of seeing. You can sit in a room where people are breathing quietly and your own breath begins to slow. You can feel the collective energy of not enemy making. And in that energy, your own heart remembers another way. In the end, the Zen master was always returning to the same point. If you want to change the world, you must begin with the mind that creates the world. If you want to end violence, you must end the violence inside your own reactions. This does not mean you do nothing outwardly. It means your outward actions are not driven by hatred. They are driven by clarity. They are driven by the wish to reduce suffering. And that wish, when it is pure, has a different taste. It does not burn you from the inside. It steadies you. It makes you strong without making you hard. From this ground, the practice of working with anger becomes even more essential, because anger is often the first spark that turns misunderstanding into enemy making. When you know how to meet anger at its birth, right there in the body, you prevent the spark from becoming a fire. You keep your heart from becoming a battlefield. And that is not only personal peace, that is peace work in its most intimate form. Anger is often the first spark that turns a difficult moment into a war. It rises fast. It tightens the body. It narrows the mind. It makes the world feel smaller, as if there is only one urgent task to strike, to defend, to win. And because anger moves so quickly, most people meet it too late. They notice it after the message has been sent, after the harsh sentence has landed, after the door has been slammed, after the damage is already done. Then shame arrives, and shame becomes another fire. This is why the Zen master insisted that working with anger is not a side practice. It is central. If you can learn to meet anger at its beginning, you protect your life from countless unnecessary wounds. He taught a sequence that is simple enough to remember even when you are upset. Recognition, stopping, breathing, holding, looking deeply, speaking later. The whole sequence is designed to do one thing: to keep anger from turning into violence while still respecting the message anger carries. The first step is recognition. When anger arises, you name it softly inside. Anger is here, not to condemn yourself, not to justify yourself, simply to recognize reality. This matters because the moment you recognize anger, mindfulness is present. And when mindfulness is present, you are no longer completely possessed. You have a little space. You have a little air. The second step is stopping. Anger wants speed. It wants immediate speech. It wants you to act before you can see clearly. Stopping is not suppression. Stopping is wisdom. It is the moment you decide, I will not let this energy choose my words. If you can stop even for 10 seconds, you change the whole future. Because most harm is done in those first seconds when the mind is hot and the tongue is sharp. The third step is breathing. You return to the breath the way a person returns to the shore when they feel a current pulling them out. Breathing in, you know you are breathing in. Breathing out, you know you are breathing out. You are not using the breath as a weapon against anger. You are using the breath as arms that hold you steady. And as the breath steadies, the body receives a message: you are safe enough to pause. The Zen master emphasized that anger is not only in the head, it is in the body. It is tension in the shoulders, heat in the face, tightness in the belly pressure, in the throat. So he taught people to bring attention into the body, because when you bring attention into the body, you stop feeding anger with stories. The stories are often what make anger explode. The stories say, they always do this. The stories say, I will never be respected. The stories say, I have to punish them. These stories pour fuel on the fire. But when you feel the anger as sensation, heat, tightness, pressure, you begin to meet it as energy, not as a command. This is where holding begins. You hold anger the way a mother holds a crying baby. You do not shame it. You do not push it away. You do not let it run the house. You simply hold it with presence. You might say, my dear anger, I know you are there. I am taking care of you. If it helps, place a hand on your chest or belly. The body understands touch. Touch communicates safety. And safety is what allows the nervous system to soften. At first, you may not believe these gentle words. That is okay. The practice is not about perfect belief. It is about training. You are teaching your mind a new way to respond to intensity. You are teaching your body that it does not need to turn intensity into violence. Each time you do this, you water a new seed. A seed of steadiness. A seed of care. A seed of freedom. Then comes the step that transforms anger into insight, looking deeply. The Zen master said anger is rarely what it appears to be. Anger is often the mask of pain. It is often the outer shell of fear. It is often the guard at the door of a tender place. When you hold anger with mindfulness, you can begin to ask very gently, what is my anger protecting? Often the answer is something simple and human. You are protecting your dignity. You are protecting your need to be valued. You are protecting a wound that has been touched. You are protecting the part of you that does not want to be abandoned again. when you see this anger begins to change. Because now you are no longer arguing with the other person in your mind. You are meeting your own wound. And wounds heal through care, not through punishment. This is also where compassion becomes practical. Compassion does not mean letting people mistreat you. It means seeing clearly what is happening in you and responding in a way that does not multiply suffering. Sometimes the wise response is to step away. Sometimes it is to set a firm boundary. Sometimes it is to say no. But when your no is born from clarity instead of hatred, it lands differently. It protects without poisoning. The Zen master also taught that anger often rises because we do not feel heard. The pain behind many arguments is not the topic itself. It is the feeling of being unseen. This is why deep listening and working with anger belong together. If you can take care of your anger first, you become capable of listening. If you can listen, you become capable of understanding. If you can understand, you become capable of speaking in a way that invites the other person back to humanity. He offered a simple guideline. When anger is strong, do not try to resolve the issue immediately. That is like trying to have a delicate conversation while your house is on fire. First, put the fire out, or at least calm it enough that you can see the room. Later, when you have steadiness, you speak. And you speak not with accusation, but with truth. You describe your experience. When that happened, I felt hurt. I felt afraid. I felt alone. These words reveal rather than attack. They invite listening rather than defense. This is how a fight becomes a conversation. Not always immediately, and not always perfectly, but gradually through practice. And even if the other person cannot listen right away, you still protect your own heart from becoming a battlefield. You still refuse to add more fire. You can see how this connects back to everything the Zen master taught about enemies. Anger creates enemies quickly. It wants a target. It wants a label. It wants to reduce the other person to one moment, one flaw, one insult. But when you hold anger and look deeply, you begin to see causes and conditions. You begin to see your own wounds. You begin to see the other person's fear. You begin to see two habit energies colliding. And in that, seeing the enemy image begins to dissolve. Not because the problem disappears, but because your mind becomes larger than the problem. You regain the ability to choose a response that reduces suffering. This is the quiet discipline behind real peace. It does not begin with grand speeches. It begins when you are triggered and you decide to breathe. It begins when you want to send the message and you pause. It begins when you want to punish and you choose to understand. This is what it means to stop shooting your brother in daily life. Not only with weapons, but with words with contempt, with the sharpness of a mind that has forgotten how to listen. And when you practice this again and again, something very gentle happens. Your anger becomes less frightening. Not because it vanishes, but because you know what to do when it arrives. You recognize it. You stop. You breathe. You hold. You look deeply. You speak later. And the more you practice, the more quickly you return home. There is a quiet moment that changes everything, and it is smaller than most people imagine. It is the moment you realize you have a choice before you speak. Not a huge choice, not a dramatic decision, but a tiny opening, a breath, a pause, a single second in which awareness arrives. Many people believe freedom is something far away, something you earn after you fix your life. But in the Zen master's teaching, freedom is born in these small openings. It is born the moment you stop being completely carried by habit energy. This is why he returned so often to the image of the mother and the crying baby. Because the mind wants to do extremes. When an emotion arises, we want to crush it or obey it. We want to suppress it or express it. We want to force it to disappear or let it take over. The mother shows a different intelligence. She does not crush the baby. She does not obey the baby. She holds the baby. She stays present. And because she stays, the baby begins to settle. In the same way, when a difficult mental formation arises, you do not have to make it your enemy, and you do not have to let it rule you. You can hold it with mindfulness. And holding does not mean being passive. Holding means keeping awareness present while the energy moves. Holding means giving the nervous system the message we can be with this. Holding means staying long enough for understanding to appear. The Zen master explained that when you hold an emotion like this, you are doing two things at once. First, you are preventing the emotion from becoming speech and action that creates harm. Second, you are giving the emotion the conditions it needs to transform. This is the key. Emotions do not transform because you command them. They transform because you provide a different environment. A baby stops crying not because you threaten it, but because you hold it. A storm passes not because you shout at the sky, but because weather moves. An emotion softens when it is no longer alone, when it is no longer being fed by stories, when it is being met by steady presence. This is why mindfulness is not merely attention. It is compassionate attention. The quality matters. If you notice your anger with harshness, I shouldn't feel this, you add another layer of suffering. If you notice your fear with contempt, I'm weak, you add shame. But if you notice with gentleness, hello my fear, I'm here, you change the whole relationship. The emotion still exists, but it is held in warmth instead of judgment. The Zen master also emphasized that practice becomes real in the body. When you are upset, your body reveals it immediately. The shoulders rise, the breath shortens, the jaw tightens, the belly contracts. The body is not hiding anything. So he encouraged people to use the body as a bell. When you notice tension, you pause, you breathe, you soften the shoulders, you relax the jaw. This is not cosmetic. It is a direct way of changing the nervous system's signal from danger to safety. And when the nervous system feels safer, the mind becomes less desperate. It becomes less sharp. It becomes more able to listen. This is also why the Zen master loved walking meditation. When you walk slowly, you give the body a way to discharge energy without turning it into harm. You let anger move through the legs instead of through the tongue. You let anxiety move through the breath instead of through catastrophic thinking. Each step becomes a way to return. Each step becomes a way to say, without words, I am here. I am home. And when you repeat this, you build a new habit energy. A habit energy of returning. Over time, this new habit energy begins to appear in daily life. You notice yourself about to send the angry text and you pause. You notice yourself about to speak sharply and you breathe. You notice yourself rehearsing blame in your mind and you choose to soften. This is not perfection. It is practice. And practice is how the storehouse changes. Every time you respond with mindfulness, you water the seed of mindfulness. Every time you respond with compassion, you water the seed of compassion. and what you water grows. This is also how you heal what was inherited. Theo's story is powerful because it shows the mechanism clearly. He inherited a pattern of harshness. He did not choose it. But in one moment of recognition, he refused to pass it on. He stopped. He breathed. He walked. And in that refusal, a new future began. He realized that his father was also caught, also carrying inherited pain. And that insight softened the anger. It turned it into a wish, may we both be free. This is what healing looks like across generations. Not a dramatic confrontation, but a gradual transformation of habit energy. The Zen master taught that when you practice this, you are not only helping yourself, you are helping everyone around you, because your calm becomes contagious. Your steadiness becomes a refuge. When you do not add fuel to a conflict, the conflict has less oxygen. When you listen instead of attack, the other person has a chance to soften. When you speak from understanding, misunderstanding begins to dissolve. In this way, one person's practice can change the emotional climate of an entire room. And this is why he insisted that mindfulness must be lived, not just discussed. It must appear in the moment the door slams, in the moment the child cries, in the moment the parent criticizes, in the moment you feel unseen. If mindfulness stays only on the meditation cushion, it remains fragile. But when mindfulness enters these ordinary moments, it becomes strength. It becomes protection. It becomes love in action. The Zen master also said that there is a kind of happiness available when you stop fighting yourself. It is not the excitement of getting what you want. It is the quiet relief of being at peace with what is here. When you stop treating your emotions as enemies, you no longer waste energy on inner war. That energy returns to you as vitality, as softness, as a deeper capacity to enjoy simple things, a cup of tea, a quiet room, a slow breath, the feeling of being alive. This is why the practice is not heavy. It is liberating. It is like putting down a bag you did not realize you were carrying. And in that lightness, something becomes possible. The mind becomes clearer. The heart becomes more open. And the next step on the path begins to appear, not only taking care of emotions as they arise, but reshaping the deeper patterns in the storehouse so that wholesome seeds become stronger and unwholesome seeds become less dominant. That is the next dimension of the garden. Not only what you do in the moment of anger, but what you do every day, so that anger has less power to arise in the first place. The Zen master called this the work of cultivation, and it is gentle work, but it is profound. The Zen master taught that transformation is not only about what you do when a storm arrives. It is also about what you do on calm days, when the sky inside you is clear. Because what you do on calm days determines how strong you are on stormy days. If you only practice when you're overwhelmed, practice will always feel like emergency. But if you practice daily gently, the mind changes at a deeper level. The storehouse changes. The garden changes. And over time, the storms still come, but they have less power to destroy. He called this the work of cultivation. Cultivation is not a dramatic act. It is not a single breakthrough. It is the steady habit of watering the seeds you want to grow and refusing to keep watering the seeds that create suffering. And because the mind learns through repetition, cultivation becomes the most reliable form of freedom. This is why the Zen master spoke about mental formations. A mental formation is any state that arises in consciousness, an emotion, a thought pattern, a mood, a perception. Some mental formations bring ease, gratitude, compassion, clarity, equanimity. Others bring tension, resentment, jealousy, despair, discrimination. The goal is not to become a person who never has difficult mental formations. The goal is to become skilled, to know how to welcome what is wholesome and how to care for what is unwholesome without being dominated by it. The storehouse holds all these seeds, and the storehouse responds to what you water. If you consume angry media every day, you are watering anger. If you rehearse resentments every night, you are watering resentment. If you compare yourself constantly, you are watering insecurity. These may seem like private habits, but they are like daily gardening, and over time, the garden becomes shaped by them. But the opposite is also true. Each time you practice mindful breathing, you water stability. Each time you practice gratitude, you water joy. Each time you practice deep listening, you water compassion. Each time you practice a mindful step, you water presence. And the storehouse learns. It begins to offer these wholesome states more easily. They rise into consciousness more quickly. They become more available when you need them. This is what it means for practice to become natural. The Zen master emphasized that this is not about forcing yourself to think positive thoughts. Forced positivity can become another kind of violence because it rejects your real experience. Cultivation is different. It is honest. It is simply choosing to feed what helps and to stop feeding what harms. It is learning that your attention is food and your mind becomes what it repeatedly consumes. He offered many practical ways to cultivate wholesome seeds. One was to create moments of stillness each day, even very short ones. A few minutes of sitting, not to achieve anything but to arrive. A few minutes of conscious breathing before sleep. A few minutes of walking slowly, feeling the feet, feeling the air. These small practices are like watering a seed drop by drop. Over weeks and months, the seed becomes a tree. Another was mindful speech. He taught that speech is also a kind of watering. When you speak harshly, you water harshness in yourself and in others. When you speak with understanding, you water understanding. Even the words you speak to yourself matter. If you constantly scold yourself, you water shame. If you learn to speak to yourself gently, you water self-compassion. This is not indulgence. It is the environment your heart needs to heal. He also taught mindful consumption. What you watch, what you read, what you listen to, the conversations you enter, these are seeds entering the storehouse. If you fill the mind with violence and panic, the mind will produce violence and panic. If you fill the mind with calm beauty and wisdom, the mind will produce more calm and wisdom. This is why the Zen master said that mindfulness is also a kind of ethics. It is the ethics of what you allow into your consciousness. At a deeper level, he explained that when a seed rises and becomes a mental formation, it strengthens itself. Each time anger rises and you indulge it, the seed of anger becomes stronger. Each time fear rises and you feed it, fear becomes stronger. This is the mechanism of habit energy. But each time anger rises and you hold it with mindfulness, you weaken the old habit. You are not feeding it in the same way. And each time you water understanding instead, you strengthen a new habit. Over time, the old pathway loses its dominance. It does not disappear instantly, but it becomes less automatic. It becomes less loud. This is why the Zen master sometimes spoke in the language of rewiring even before neuroscience used that word. He was describing the mind's plasticity. He was describing how repeated patterns shape the brain and the heart. And he was offering a method for reshaping those patterns through mindful awareness and daily cultivation. It is slow work, but it is trustworthy work. It does not depend on mood. It does not depend on perfect circumstances. It depends on returning again and again patiently, like a gardener returning to water. And because it is slow, it can be done by anyone. You do not need to be special. You do not need to be flawless. You only need sincerity. You only need willingness. You only need to remember again and again that you are planting your future with every moment of attention. This is also why community matters. When you practice alone, your habit energy can pull you back into old patterns easily. But when you practice with others, you borrow their stability. You sit with others, and your mind becomes calmer. You walk with others, and your steps become steadier. You listen to others, and your heart learns how to stay open. The Zen master built communities because he knew transformation is hard to sustain alone. A sangha, a community of practice, is like a collective garden. When many people water wholesome seeds together, the environment itself becomes supportive. And from that supportive environment, something beautiful can emerge. Ordinary life begins to change texture. Meals become slower. Conversations become gentler. Silence becomes comfortable. Even difficulties feel less threatening because you are no longer facing them with a single isolated mind. You are facing them with a practice and sometimes with a community behind you. This is the quiet revolution the Zen master offered the world. Not a revolution of anger, but a revolution of mindfulness. Not a revolution of enemies, but a revolution of understanding. And it begins in a way that is almost invisible from the outside. One breath, one step, one choice about what you water in your mind. When mindfulness becomes daily cultivation, it stops being something you do only when you remember. It becomes the atmosphere you live in. And in that atmosphere, even ordinary moments begin to carry a different weight. A doorway becomes a bell. A kettle boiling becomes a bell. A pause before speaking becomes a bell. Life itself becomes a steady invitation to return. This is why the Zen master loved simple rituals. Not because he wanted people to perform spirituality, but because rituals shape habit energy. They give the body and mind a predictable rhythm of returning. And when the rhythm is predictable, the nervous system begins to trust. It begins to soften. It begins to stop scanning for danger all the time. He taught people to start with the smallest actions. When you wake up before reaching for your phone, take 3 conscious breaths. Feel the body. Feel the bed. Feel the fact that you are alive. When you stand up slowly. Feel your feet touch the floor. When you brush your teeth, know you are brushing your teeth. When you wash your face, feel the water. When you drink water, taste it. These are not trivial details. These are moments of coming back to reality. And reality, when you meet it fully, is more spacious than your thoughts about it. He also taught mindful walking as a primary medicine. Walking is something you do every day, which means it can become a practice every day. You do not need to walk far. You do not need to walk fast. You walk to arrive. Each step becomes a homecoming. The Zen master sometimes offered a simple way to walk. Breathe in and take a step. Breathe out and take a step. Or breathe in and silently say, I have arrived. breathe out, and say, "I am home." When you do this, you are no longer walking to get somewhere. You are walking to be here. And when you are here, the mind stops chasing. It stops climbing hills in the imagination. It rests. One of his most gentle teachings was about tea. He would invite people to hold a cup of tea as if it were the only thing to do in the universe. Not because tea is special, but because attention is special. When you hold the cup, you feel its warmth. You smell the steam. You take a sip and notice the taste. And in that simple act, you practice something that modern life rarely offers single-mindedness: presence without fragmentation. When you drink tea like this, you are not drinking your worries. You are not drinking your plans. You are drinking tea. And that sounds small, but it is a profound re-education of the mind. The Zen master knew that many people live in constant anticipation. They are always half in the future. Even when their body is here, their mind is already somewhere else. So he taught rituals of stopping throughout the day. Before you begin work, stop for a few breaths. Before you answer a message, stop for a few breaths. Before you eat, stop for a few breaths. Before you speak in a difficult conversation, stop for a few breaths. These pauses are like building little islands of peace inside a busy ocean. And over time, those islands become a new continent. He also emphasized that mindfulness is not meant to be stiff or serious. It is meant to be alive. It is meant to bring you back to the miracle of being here. When you are truly present, you can touch beauty that was always available. The sound of wind, the softness of light, the quiet hum of a room, the sensation of breathing. These are not dramatic pleasures, but they are steady. They do not demand anything from you. They simply invite you to be alive. And in that aliveness, a certain kind of healing begins. Because much of suffering is the feeling of being cut off from your body, from the present moment, from life itself. Mindfulness reconnects you. It returns you to what is actually happening. And when you are returned, you can care. You can respond. You can choose. You can stop repeating the past. This is why the Zen masters' communities placed such importance on how they ate together. Meals were not rushed. People chewed slowly. They practiced silence, not as punishment, but as nourishment. They listened to the food. They listened to their bodies. They listened to gratitude. In that silence, people discovered that peace is not something you think about. It is something you practice through the body. It is the calm that arrives when you stop scattering yourself. He would sometimes guide people to look at a simple piece of bread and see that it contains the whole cosmos. Sunshine and rain, soil and wind, farmers and bakers, time and effort. The bread is not separate. It is into being made edible. When you eat with this awareness, you stop taking life for granted. You stop living as if you are entitled to everything and grateful for nothing. Gratitude begins to appear naturally, like a flower blooming when the conditions are right. This kind of daily mindfulness might seem small compared to the problems of the world, but the Zen master insisted it is not small, because a world is made of minds, and minds are shaped by habits. If millions of people live in rushing fear and reactivity, the world becomes a place of rushing fear and reactivity. But if even a small number of people begin to live with steadiness and compassion, a different energy enters the world. A different possibility appears. The Zen master called this a quiet revolution, a revolution without enemies, a revolution of presence. And it begins in the most ordinary places, in your kitchen, in your workplace, in the way you walk to the bathroom at night, in the way you breathe before sleep. This is why the practice is so suitable for you tonight. You do not need to do anything heroic. You only need to return, one breath at a time, one soft moment at a time. And as you return, the nervous system learns a new truth. Peace is not far away. Peace is here whenever you arrive. When the Zen master spoke about community, he did not speak as someone offering a social club. He spoke as someone offering shelter. A sangha, in his understanding, is a refuge for the human heart. It is a place where you can borrow stability when your own stability feels thin. Because even when you understand the teachings, habit energy can still pull you back. Old patterns can still rise. The world can still feel loud. And in those moments, practicing alone can be difficult. A community of practice is like a group of lamps in one room. One lamp can flicker in wind, but many lamps together create steady light. This is why his communities practice together so deliberately. They walked together. They ate together. They sat in silence together. They listened to bells together. They trained in the same small acts of returning not as rules, but as nourishment. And something subtle happened in that shared rhythm. People began to feel safe again. Not because the world became perfect, but because they were no longer isolated in their struggle. In a mindful community, you do not have to pretend you are always calm. You do not have to hide your suffering to look spiritual. You can be honest. And honesty becomes possible because the environment itself is gentle. When someone is suffering, others do not rush to fix them. They practice presence. They breathe with them. They listen. They offer the kind of attention that says without words, you belong here, even with this pain. That belonging is a powerful medicine because so much suffering is amplified by the belief that you are alone. The Zen master also emphasized that a sangha is not only made of people, it is made of practices. It is made of routines that support the mind. The bell is part of the sangha. The walking path is part of the sangha. The silent meal is part of the sangha. Even the way you wash dishes can be part of the sangha if you do it with presence. When a community shares these practices, the practices become stronger than individual moods. Even if one person is restless, the collective steadiness can carry them. Even if one person is sad, the collective calm can hold them. This is why he said, the true bodhisattva is often the community itself. Not one heroic person, but a collective energy of mindfulness and compassion. A community that keeps practicing, keeps listening, keeps refusing to make enemies. In a world that constantly trains people to divide and attack, a community that practices understanding becomes a radical presence. It becomes a living proof that another way is possible. One of the most beautiful expressions of this was the way the community ate. They practiced eating in silence slowly with gratitude. At first, many visitors found this strange. They were used to filling meals with conversation, or with screens, or with rushing. Silence felt awkward. But after a few days, the silence began to feel like a warm blanket. People discovered how much noise they carried inside. They discovered how exhausting it is to always be performing, always reacting, always commenting. And in the quiet of a meal, they found rest. In that silence, they could taste their food more clearly. They could feel their bodies more clearly. They could sense gratitude more naturally. And gratitude in the Zen master's teaching is not a polite thought. It is a way of seeing reality. When you see deeply, you realize that nothing in your life is separate. A bowl of rice is sunshine and rain. It is soil and farmers. It is time and labor. It is the whole world arriving at your table. When you eat with awareness, you are eating the cosmos. And that recognition softens the heart. It makes you less entitled. It makes you more tender. It makes you more alive. He sometimes used the phrase, bread from the cosmos, not to be poetic, but to train perception. Because when you see bread only as bread, you are asleep. When you see bread as the whole universe condensed into a simple gift, you are awake. And awakening in the deepest sense is not a mystical event. It is the return of gratitude. It is the return of wonder. It is the return of humility. It is the return of love. The Zen master also taught that when a community practices mindfulness together, it creates a field of calm, a field of steadiness. And this field is not imaginary. You can feel it. You can feel it when you walk into a room where people are sitting quietly breathing. Something in you begins to slow down automatically. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing deepens. Your mind becomes less sharp. This is why Sangha is refuge. It is collective nervous system regulation. It is collective healing. It is the human heart remembering itself in the presence of other hearts that are also remembering. And this is where the teaching becomes a gift for you tonight, even if you are alone. Because you can still touch Sangha energy in small ways. You can listen to a recording of calm speech and let your own breath slow. You can sit quietly, imagining others who are also practicing. You can remember that you are not the only one learning to stop to breathe, to come home. Even that remembrance changes something. It softens loneliness. It makes practice feel more possible. In a mindful community, the Zen master said, we learn to take care of each other, not by controlling each other, but by practicing ourselves. When you practice breathing, you offer calm to the room. When you practice listening, you offer safety. When you practice gentle speech, you offer protection. This is the quiet way a Sangha heals. It is not dramatic. It is steady. It is the opposite of war. And that is why it matters. And when you live in this atmosphere long enough, you begin to understand something very tender. The practices are not merely techniques. They are doors into a deeper home. A home that is built from three qualities: mindfulness, concentration, and insight. The Zen master sometimes spoke of these as three doors or three pillars supporting an inner temple. When you enter this temple, you are not escaping life. You are meeting life from a place of clarity and peace. The Zen master sometimes spoke of an inner temple, not a building of stone and not a place you need to travel to, but a living refuge you can enter at any time. This temple is built from three qualities that support one another like pillars: mindfulness, concentration, and insight. Mindfulness is the first door. It is the simple act of knowing what is happening while it is happening. Knowing you are breathing in, knowing you are breathing out, knowing anger is here, knowing fear is here, knowing the body is tense, knowing the mind is rushing. Mindfulness is not complicated. It is honest attention. And because it is honest, it is already healing. It brings you out of the trance of automatic reaction and back into reality. Concentration is the second door. Concentration is what happens when mindfulness becomes steady. Instead of attention scattering in 100 directions, it gathers. It becomes one. This does not mean you force the mind into stiffness. It means you gently keep returning until attention begins to settle naturally, like muddy water becoming clear when you stop shaking the jar. In concentration, the nervous system calms. The mind becomes less noisy. The heart becomes more available. Insight is the third door. Insight is what arises when mindfulness and concentration are present. Insight is not an intellectual conclusion. It is a clear seeing that changes you. You see that emotions are energies that rise and pass. You see that you are not your habit energy. You see that what you water grows. You see that enemies are often made in the mind. You see that understanding is possible. You see that home is not only a place. Home is a way of being. When these three doors open, even a difficult life becomes workable. Not because difficulties disappear, but because you are no longer fighting reality in the old way. You are no longer abandoned inside your pain. You are holding it. You are listening. You are caring. You are responding instead of reacting. And this is the quiet gift of the whole journey. The Zen master did not offer a promise that you will never feel anger again. He did not offer a fantasy of a life without grief. He offered something more trustworthy. He offered a way to remain human, a way to keep your heart open without letting it be destroyed, a way to carry suffering without passing it on, a way to live in the world without turning the world into an enemy. If you remember only one thing tonight, let it be this. You do not have to chase peace as if it lives somewhere else. You can return. You can arrive. You can come home. Not later. Not when your life is perfect. Now, in one breath. So as you settle towards sleep, you might practice very gently. Breathing in, you can whisper inside, I have arrived. Breathing out, I am home. Let the words be soft. Let them be slow. Let them be like warm light moving through the body. If thoughts come, let them come. If feelings come, let them come. You do not have to fight them. You only have to stay present, like a mother holding a crying baby, like a mountain holding a storm. And if you find yourself thinking about the past, return to the breath. If you find yourself worrying about the future, return to the breath. The breath is always here. The breath is your bridge. Each time you return, you water the seed of peace. Each time you return, you strengthen the habit of coming home. Somewhere in the world, others are also listening. Others are also learning to stop. Others are also trying to be gentle with their own hearts. You are not alone in this. And tonight, you can let yourself rest in that quiet companionship. May you be safe. May your body soften. May your mind become clear. May your heart feel held. And may your sleep be deep and healing. Thank you for spending this long night with the long night. If these stories brought you calm, you're warmly welcome to stay with us. Subscribe for more gentle Zen nights, and let this space be your quiet home whenever you need it. Good night.